So there is a lot of news about NATO and Western countries getting ready to lift the ban on firing their munitions into Russia. So this is a significant escalation of force when you zoom out and look at the broader picture of what this means. And we'll go through some more content in this video than in previous videos. I believe I added it to this section, and it will provide some context to look at this whole broader picture. So as this post reads, Joe Biden is poised to lift a ban on British Storm Shadow missiles being fired into Russia by Ukraine. So there, in that sentence, we see the president of a NATO country is directing the operations of Ukraine, a non-NATO country that is currently at war with Russia. And Russia is pointing to its red lines saying, if you get involved, then we will expand and include you. And you have to take this in the context of an earlier video I made of existential crisis. Russia believes it's in an existential crisis. Its ability to exist is being infringed on. It's being trapped by NATO and other countries. And it must fight. That is what it believes. Ukraine believes it's in an existential crisis, and it is. It's literally being attacked by another country. So these two countries are in existential conflict. And behind the scenes, behind Ukraine, you have countries who do not necessarily believe they are in an existential crisis, even though they will make those talking points. We have to win the war in Ukraine or we're next. So even though they're framing it that way, their actions don't match their words. If the US and other NATO countries literally thought they were in an existential conflict, you would not see a continued delay of weapons and decisions to fight Russia. If your existence is literally at stake, you will do anything you can with all of your resources to fight back. Actions speak louder than words, right? Let's just put it in this scenario. If you, an individual, were walking down a street in a major US city, and all of a sudden you had someone come up to you and start attacking you, would you try to run? Would you try to fight? What if you turned around to run and there was another person there that was a part of the attacker group? And there's another person. Let's say they started attacking you. Would you just lay down and die? Or would you do everything in your power to fight back as if your life depended on it? So take that same context and instead of an individual or individuals attacking a country, put that in the mindset of the US. If the US was literally in an existential crisis, would it not be sending all of its full force and might and power to Ukraine to engage in this war? Instead of drip feeding munitions, instead of drip feeding support. Actions will tell you the truth of the story. Ignore the words. So I think we have some more posts here today. Let's see if I can get to them. So here we go. The White House is finalizing plans to expand where Ukraine can hit inside of Russia. The White House is finalizing a plan to ease some restrictions on how Ukraine can use U.S. donated weapons and better protect itself from Russian missiles, according to a Western official and two other people, quote unquote, familiar with the discussions. Nobody wants to disclose their sources. Nobody wants to be disclosed as a source these days. This is why it's very difficult to see what is misinformation and what's not. The details of the plan are still coming together, but officials in Washington, London, Kiev have in recent days discussed expanding the area inside Russia that Ukraine can hit with American and British-made weapons. They've also discussed how to prevent additional cross-border attacks by Russia, including the U.S. agreeing to allow Ukraine to use UK long-range missiles that contain American parts to strike inside Russia. U.S. officials have also pointed out that since the Army no longer buys Army tactical missile systems, the inventory is limited and is drawing close to where the U.S. would be concerned about its own stockpile. The maker of the missile, Lockheed Martin, is still producing several hundred a year, but they are slated for sale to allies overseas. The replacement for the weapon, the precision strike missile, is only beginning to be fielded, and not in numbers to fully replace the missiles currently being expended. So let's get rid of all the white noise in here about stockpiles and whatnot, and let's look at the most pressing near-term thing here. Officials in Washington, London, and Kiev have in recent days discussed expanding the area inside Russia that Ukraine can hit with American and British-made weapons. If you're Russia, then you've set out this policy that if you get involved, you become an enemy. And we see mission creep and scope expanding from NATO in the West in support of Ukraine. Now, when you have mission creep and scope expansion from one side, you should expect the same thing to happen from the other party that you're in conflict with. If you escalate, they escalate. If they escalate, you escalate. Unless something happens and all of a sudden you come to terms and the whole thing gets very quiet. But we see the opposite of that happening. We see communication lines closing. We see communication lines between opponents decreasing. And we see escalation kinetically increasing. We see all the signs that this is going to evolve into a much broader conflict. A lot more kinetic damage. We also see a Ukrainian cargo ship carrying grain that was traveling to Egypt was subjected to a missile strike. Where this happened? Not sure. Who did it? Not sure, but we know it's carrying grain, so I would infer this means coming from Ukraine, traveling to Egypt, so north, very far north of the Houthis, so not the Houthis. This appears to be inferring that it would have been perhaps a Russian target. Again, here we see the United States sanctions 16 Venezuelans, including the president of the Venezuelan Supreme Court. In the light of Eric Prince putting out a message and hosting a website with a countdown that says very soon Venezuelans will have the opportunity to be protagonists in bringing forth what Venezuelans want, Eric Prince, the founder of a private army, Eric Prince, the gentleman who has very intimate ties to the military-industrial complex, Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater. So we see tensions with the U.S. and other countries around the world growing, while saying it doesn't have the stockpiles to conduct a larger, broader war. Well, how about wars on several fronts? And in the purview of this, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has ordered the USS Theodore Roosevelt and USS Russell to return to the United States, both of which were called to the Middle East some weeks ago, fearing an imminent Iranian retaliation against Israel, which never came to fruition. Yet, perhaps this is exactly what they were waiting for. So that's all I have for this episode. Until next time, stay exponentially aware.